Whenever you're in a relationship with anybody, sometimes there gets to a point to where you have to ask yourself whether or not you need to walk away or you need to try harder. And I'm here to tell you that if you are dealing with a narcissist or a Jezebel or a succubus or an incubus, the choice is going to be very easy for you. But how you make the option to do so and how you go about doing whatever choice you make is a completely different story. Whenever you realize that you're in an abusive relationship, there's often a sense of great grief and sorrow that comes over you. And I know this because I was in a lot of abusive relationships throughout my life, and yet I kept repeating the same patterns. I kept repeating the same patterns over and over again. And it wasn't until I was about 21, 22, which was about 5-6 years ago, when I realized that I need to actually have some serious self-introspection. And I didn't even know where to start. Because how do you look at something that you don't even know you can't see? It's like having a blind spot in your rear view mirror or something, or wherever you're driving, and you don't even know the blind spot is there. Like, how do you go about that kind of a thing where you don't even know what you don't know in the abusive relationships and why you keep attracting certain people? Well, sometimes you just have to decide not to decide. And it's kind of like thinking about it from a sports perspective. I played tennis and basketball when I was in high school, and I played on the tennis team. I played basketball, but I wasn't on the team in high school. And I loved these sports. These were my two favorite sports, still are to this day. And something about shooting a basket or hitting the tennis ball with the racket, it's that you learn the basics so that you don't have to worry about knowing the basics later on when you're actually in the middle of the match or in the middle of the game, right? It just comes automatic. And it's the same thing with life. You have to understand the basics of relationships so that when the healthy ones come along, you just click. And especially if you're a chosen one and you're trying to break generational curses, you're going to be almost attracting narcissists and succubuses and the incubus. For anybody that doesn't know, the succubus is basically the female sex symbol, and then the incubus is the male sex symbol. They're both demonic spirits that do exist in our society. And the Jezebel spirit is from the Bible. And this is the Jezebel spirit that she basically, according to the story, convinced the man that she was with to give up his life for her, only to find that she was going around and she was with other men, and she was basically trying to destroy everything that he built. And I do think that the Jezebel spirit destroys the resources of both men and women. And I think the Jezebel spirit also can exist in both men and women. This is something we have to understand about the spiritual world. You know, let me explain something about the spiritual world here. Biologically, you may be male or female. However, you may be effeminate as a man, which is frowned upon in the Bible, by the way. And you may be overly masculine as a woman, which is also frowned upon in the Bible. And the reason that it's frowned upon is not so much that it's just that God doesn't like it or God hates it. And yes, God does hate wickedness, but it's more so that when you are overly effeminate as a man or overly masculine as a woman, it completely disrupts your internal psychology. And the ancients that wrote these books knew this. They knew these things. They just didn't know the psychology of it. They knew the religious aspects and they could see what would happen right before their eyes, but they didn't understand the psychological aspects and the behavioral psychology of what is going on. And so sometimes narcissists and Jezebels and Incubus and Succubuses, they'll just treat you bad for no reason. And there's really no understanding about it. But you have to also recognize that this is a great time for self-growth and self-love as well. I, for a long time, did not know what it was like to really love myself. And in fact, it wasn't until I really started to pray for forgiveness from God for all of the sins that I did that I really started to feel that what I was actually doing was self-forgiveness in the long run. I was learning how to forgive myself as well. In God's forgiveness for me for my sins, I also learned how to forgive myself. And it taught me that, yeah, I can fail. Failing is okay. Because I was a perfectionist growing up. I didn't want anything to be wrong. I didn't want anything to go the wrong way. However, what I learned is that what you can actually do is fail and learn. And it doesn't matter how many times you fail before you get it right. Now, of course, we all have a time frame on this earth, and I do think that you should treat yourself as if you are living on borrowed time, because you are, in some way, shape, or form. But you can also realize that you can fail, and you can fail. But how you deal with the failure is completely up to you. And so you have to look at what changed about you in your relationships to these kinds of people. And why you're no longer in that situation. And think about this, right? Jesus went into the desert to intentionally be tempted by the devil. And why? Why would God intentionally want to be tempted? That doesn't really make a lot of sense at first glance, but then again, it's like, oh, well, he's God. Why shouldn't he be tempted just as much as anybody else? Why shouldn't he be tempted? This is something to think about. Because some people will try to ruin your life because they have nothing better to do, like the devil. The devil has nothing better to do than to try to destroy your life. And when he can sense that you're starting to really change your ways, that's when there's going to be almost like a panic set in the spiritual realm where all of a sudden you're going to be attacked spiritually on all different sides. And there's not going to be a lot that you can do in certain situations like that, except for one thing. Be willing to be tempted. Because we're going to be tempted for as long as we live anyway. So you might as well at least go in and get the hardest possible part of the temptation over with. Which is, I think, exactly what Jesus intended with that. But he did have some kind of intention with it. But another thing to think about is to not let yourself be destroyed by your own inner critic. This is something else I also had to deal with and learn how to communicate more appropriately with. was my inner critic, because I am the harshest critic that I know on myself. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt, or it doesn't, or at least it didn't hurt when people were trying to bring me down. And yeah, like sometimes when I get the hate today, like it doesn't bring me down. It just is kind of a bummer for that person. It's just like, man, you could be anything that you wanted in this life, and you chose to be a hater. Man, that sucks. That sucks for you. It sucks for you. And that's also how you have to look at yourself sometimes. Like whenever you are being overly critical on yourself, ask yourself, am I really worth being destroyed over and critiqued to the point to where it shatters my connection with God? Or can I start making changes and look at my life in a different light and see the patterns that I've done throughout the past, wherever, how many years, whatever, in my relationships or in my work or in my finances or in my emotions or anything like that, and exactly what can I do to change that? What can I do? Because you can, what you can change sometimes is the most worth changing. And sometimes what you can't change is often outside of you. In fact, I would say 99% of what you can't change is outside of you. Almost everything that you can change is internal. And we live in a wicked, cruel, crazy, really backwards world right now. And people think it's funny to abuse others sometimes. That's just the kind of world that we live in. And something that you can acknowledge is, well, at least I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm making an effort. I am dedicated to my journey with God, and I am dedicated to flee from that which I know to be wrong, and I'm dedicated to flee from anything that I'm doing wrong that I don't know about that I'm doing wrong at this time, so that I can go to and attract situations and people in my life that are more worth being around, because I know in my heart that I am doing everything that I can to make the best possible difference for myself and for those that I care for and the ones that are willing to be cared for around me. This is another thing you have to look at with relationships with the Incubus, Succubus, the Jezebel. They don't want to be helped. These are spirits that could give a rat's ass about you wanting to help them. And you have to recognize if you have any people-pleasing behaviors or codependent behaviors. Because if you're having a codependent or people-pleasing behavior toward another person, the likelihood that you developed this trait as a self-defense mechanism in childhood is, I would say upwards of 85%. And the reason for that is because everybody that I've had consultations with, or everybody that I've talked to growing up, or even in my own life that I've seen that has done people-pleasing and that has people-pleasing behaviors, did it and started doing these kinds of behaviors as a way to get validation from their parents or their child or their what's the term? Why can I not think of the term? Not child bearer. Anyway, you guys know what I'm saying. The people that care for him. Caregiver. That's what it is. Yes. They were trying to get attention and validation from the caregiver, and they didn't get that. And it's also been the case that I've seen with women out and about that I've seen that are more promiscuous in some way, shape, or form. They've likely either been really burned by a guy in their past, and they decided to just take it out on guys as a sort of revenge. Like, I had a girl in my life that was a narcissist that I thought really loved me. I genuinely thought that. It's crazy how good she was. However, she told me one time, this is fucked up, but this is exactly the kind of person that she was, and this was the kind of person I was attracted to because I was not healed at this time. She told me that she would make out with guys and go screw around with them and then she would intentionally never talk to them again, or she would only try to use her sex appeal to get them like hooked on her attention, and then she would block them on any kind of social media or texting or whatever as a revenge tactic. Now, why did she do this? Her dad was in the military, from what I understand, and he wasn't really around much, and when he was around, when he came back, he wasn't really there anyway. He would be drinking, he would be doing other things that I don't want to like put out there too much information on, and so she didn't get that kind of attention from her father. And so psychologically, I would say that the diagnosis is that she would do this for the sake of trying to get revenge at her inner animus. Now, for those of you that are not aware of Jungian psychology, as I've mentioned before in other videos, there is the ego. This is like basic Jungian psychology stuff. There's the ego, the shadow, the anima, the animus, and then the self. So the ego is obviously what you want, what you need, or what you perceive to need or want. The shadow is it's basically the dark side of yourself, the part of you that you don't want to really look at. And then the anima and the animus is the feminine experience, the totality of feminine experiences within a man's psyche. And then the animus is the masculine totality or the totality of masculine experiences in the female psyche. The animus and the anima are both things that you relate to internally, and you can project it onto other people of the opposite sex. But you can only heal it from within. And sometimes you have to have a variety of different experiences in the external world to actually heal that inner anima or animus. And then the self is just everything all encumbered all in one time. So the diagnosis, I would say, is that she was projecting her her animus onto these men in the hopes that she would relate more internally to her inner animus. Now, obviously, she didn't think about that like to that depth, but what I was really attracted to in that was the sex appeal. And I had repressed a lot of my sexuality for a lot of my childhood. And because I was exposed to a lot of different things growing up very early on that I don't want to get too much into, but I was exposed to a lot of different things early on. And there was a time where it started to really mess with my mind whenever I thought about it, whenever I thought about sexual activities. So I repressed it. And then here comes along this woman that is so open about her sexuality and just is willing to do it with anybody. And at the time, I thought that was hot. I was like, wow, this is a girl that's really in touch with her sexuality. That's great. That was some freaking beta shit that I was on. That was so stupid. Because now I know for sure that is an absolute red flag. That is a huge red flag. And I wanted to be that person to like help her heal. Stupid. Don't ever take women like that. Actually, I take that back. Don't even take women seriously, men, nowadays. Like, there's no reason to take women seriously. Because their mouth is not always connected to their brain. And what they say and what they do is usually two different things. So I take everything what they say as a grain of salt. And the good women that are out there that are listening to this, that don't want to be triggered, but maybe a little bit triggered by this, they will understand that I'm talking about a very specific group of women. And the women that I'm talking about is actually a majority of women. Just like the majority of men are beta and simps. And they really don't have a lot going for them. And yet they're going to be the provider because they have nothing else to do. Like, my goal was with this girl was to be the provider of her, for her to heal. Where really I was just neglecting myself. And I think that's what a lot of beta males do. They just neglect themselves and they don't really know what it's like to have their own best self-interest at heart. And I'm encouraging males and females to understand that you have to put your self-interest first. You absolutely have to. It's okay to put yourself first. But there's a caveat. Put your best self-interest first while simultaneously considering the outcomes of everything that you're doing and commit to behaviors that will increase the probability for goodness, truth, and beauty to be spread across the world. Because it is like a ripple effect. I've seen it. And I've received emails. Just people saying thank you. Which I really appreciate, by the way. Shout out to all of those people. It's really cool to be a part of something that is bigger than myself. And everybody watching this video, that if you've made it this far, you are a part of something bigger too. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching this video. So with that being said, I hope this message was useful and insightful. And until next time, peace be with you.